I might be in.
I think you may. I think you can up it too.
So, um, and let me ask y'all this: if I go to,
Let me get two channels.
yeah,
Just finishing this. I've got to make sure it doesn't split. So you guys can finish this. I'm sure he should. We got to keep it on the board.
yeah,
You need to check.
yeah. I need to check. I went to go check my email before I came. It's a lady I had to respond to. It wasn't Andrea. It was someone else. Do you know? You didn't get. Oh, you didn't get an email because you're not up. When I leave here today, I'm gonna go check my email again. Yeah, because I might be. It, but let me say this too. She wanted to know by tomorrow if I'm gonna say or not. I can't think of her name. Yeah, I got an email like last week, 2 weeks ago. She wants to know by tomorrow. Yeah, by the 12th, 11th or 12th. What's her name? It wasn't Andrea. It was someone else. She like let me know by the 12th. Okay, yeah.
Good morning. Welcome to the August 11th, 2015 meeting of the City of Columbia Board of Zoning Appeals. Excuse me, my name is Ernest Cromartie III. I serve as board chair. This time I'd like to introduce the other members of the board who are present this morning. We have to my far left, Reggie McKnight. To my immediate left, Patrick Hubbard. To my immediate right, Mr. Preston Young. To his immediate right, Patricia Durkin. And to her immediate right, Mr. Chuck Sally. And I'd also like to introduce the members of staff that will assist the board during this meeting. Mr. Brian Cook, Zoning Administrator, Andrew Livingood, Deputy Zoning Administrator, Ms. Andrea Wolf, Senior Secretary for Planning and Development Services. This board is charged with hearing applications for special exceptions, variances, and administrative appeals. All testimony is recorded for the record, and anyone wishing to speak must be sworn and come up to the podium here in front of us. No testimony can be taken from the floor. When you approach the podium, state your name. Please speak clearly into the microphone because, again, the meeting is being recorded. For those who plan to speak, you must be sworn. If you would, please stand at this time and raise your right hand. Do you affirm or attest that the testimony you will give today is the truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. At this time, I'll turn things over to Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. We'll start with the consent agenda. I will read or announce each case description on the consent agenda. Unless a board member requests that a case be removed from the consent agenda after it is read or announced, the items on the consent agenda will not be discussed, and the case will be considered with one motion. Therefore, if someone present would like to discuss the item on the consent agenda, it is imperative that they raise their hand or otherwise get the attention of the board chair after the specific case is read or announced. On the consent agenda, we have the approval of the July 14, 2015 minutes. We have case 15-056 special exception at 2521 and 2535 Richland Street, tax map 11505, 1001 through 07, 11509, 1001 through 04, 1719, 20, 21, special exception to expand a religious organization. The next item is 15-058 special exception at 1209 and 1205 Franklin Street, 09113-13-17 and 18, special exception for leased remote parking. Next item on the consent agenda is a case 15059, special exception, 1209 and 1205 Franklin Street, tax map 09113, 13 and 17 and 18, special exception to allow alternative surface parking for a restaurant. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the consent agenda. Is there anyone in the audience or anyone on the board that would like an item removed from the consent agenda?
You've heard the items on the consent agenda read before you. Is there anyone here who would like to have any of those items removed for discussion? I see none.
I move to approve the consent agenda, subject to any conditions and any exhibits that may be found in the case summary for that application, and to adopt as the findings of this board those findings for each case prepared by staff also found within each case file.
We have a motion from Mr. Hubbard. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. McKnight. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
For those who are here on the consent agenda, those items have been approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll move to the regular agenda now. We'll start with case 15-054, special exception at 6400 Main Street, tax map 11716-02-19, a special exception to construct an approximately 180-foot monopole wireless communication facility, a cell tower. Jonathan Yates, attorney for American Tower Corporation and T-Mobile, is the applicant and present to answer any questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. How are you?
Jonathan Yates, good to be back before you again, here today on behalf of American Tower Corporation and T-Mobile.
Yes, sir.
I have with me my good friend Steve English with Blue Ribbon Taxi Cab.
Okay.
Steve, besides being a good friend, is going to be a little bit of a human easel for me today. He's going to assist me, so we'll get into it. First and foremost, I want to thank Brian and Andrew. I have not worked in the city of Columbia about a year or two now. As usual, I came up with a lot of stupid questions. They never laughed at me and helped me get through the process. I have the luxury of working across the state, and I have to say you have two of the better professionals that I can work with in the state, and I thank them. What we're here for today, here on behalf of American Tower and T-Mobile USA, we are planning, with your permission, and we'll go through the special exception criteria in a minute, we want to place a communication facility. It would be a 180-foot, what we call a monopole-style facility. What is a monopole? A monopole is, unlike the big towers with guy wires or the three-sided lattice, a monopole is just simply a pylon of steel that we put equipment onto. T-Mobile had a deficit of coverage in the area of North Main Street, going out that way. They put American Tower to work to find the best location possible to cover this deficit. And we found an incredible property thanks to Mr. Steve English and Blue Ribbon Taxi Cab Corporation. The facility, Blue Ribbon, has owned the property for about 20 years. They've been there for about 15 years. They have a 5-acre piece of property, zone C3. On the property, they have a building where they have their dispatch center, the offices for Blue Ribbon, and also a banquet hall. That doesn't take up that much of the property. In the residual 5 acres, which is all heavily treed, they're going to allow us to place the facility. When we talk about the facility, I want to give a couple particulars about that. Again, we're 180-foot monopole style. What is important, it's designed for not only T-Mobile, but also 4 of their competitors. So it's designed for T-Mobile and 4 others. 180 is a very important height. It's allowed in the C3 district. I was part of the industry team that worked on this, the present ordinance in Columbia many years ago. Why we arrived at 180 in the C3 was important because under 200 feet in the United States, you don't have to illuminate pursuant to the FAA. The FAA, if you're 200 feet and above, requires lighting on towers for air navigation safety. This tower has been reviewed and approved by the FAA. They determined no hazard to air navigation, and they determined no lighting was required. So that's important. We're going to come in on the facility, and just to give you a feel for where we are, if you look up at the aerial there, you see the sort of cross-shaped building. That's the Blue Ribbon headquarters. We're just to the south of that. We tried to stay in the tree cover as best we could to give us that natural buffer. We'll come in with the 180-foot monopole, again designed for T-Mobile and 4 of their competitors. Then on the ground we have a 75-foot by 75-foot area that we will secure with an 8-foot fence, no barbed wire on top, pursuant to your ordinance. The facility is placed so that we're 188 feet off of North Main Street. Ordinance requires that I be 50. We're 302 feet to the rear property line, which is owned by the Board of Education, and as you can see, it's undeveloped timberland. We're 329 to the top part of the property, which is another timber property. And going down to the south, we're 92 feet to the south where you come up to the Coronet Motel. What Steve and Blue Ribbon did is gave us an absolutely perfect location. I do a lot of towers across the state. Very rarely in this kind of setting can I find a 5-acre property with this kind of incredible tree cover to help mask our facility. Our job is to get our infrastructure out there, but we want to do it in a manner where it's the least visible and the most innocuous to those around us. I'm going to have Steve help me real quickly. We're just going to run through a couple criteria. This is a special exception. I want to talk a little bit about the criteria. First, Steve will turn just a little this way, so Mr. McKnight too. Thank you, Steve. First, we have to look at the Section 17-283 criteria. These are the WCF-specific criteria found in the ordinance. Number one, the WCF, and that's in the ordinance, WCF is what they refer to as a cell tower, will not endanger the safety of residents, employees, or travelers, including but not limited to the likelihood of the failure of such structure. The structure has been designed and certified by South Carolina professional engineer Mr. Habib Azuri. It has what we call a fall factor built in, where it's designed so in case of a catastrophic condition, that fall factor stays at 90 feet, thus within the Blue Ribbon property. As it is a monopole, and don't get mad at me, but I promise I won't break the equipment, the way the monopole is actually designed, in a heavy catastrophic wind, it doesn't break at the base. The top of it's just designed to bend over. We have to replace it, but it doesn't actually fall. The second part of this question says, will we endanger the safety of residents, employees, or travelers? Absolutely not. We actually enhance safety for travelers, employees, and residents by providing effective access to 911 first responders, police, EMS, and fire. I do not know, and I apologize, I do not know the exact statistics in Richland County, but in my home county of Charleston County, our EMS dispatch presently, on a monthly basis, 84% of all calls into Charleston County EMS start at a wireless device. Why? It makes sense. Back in the old days, if I was driving down North Main Street and I got in trouble, I'd have to pull over and find a phone. Now 3 things happen. I'm in trouble, I pull out the phone off my belt, I have a constant communication with the operator, and if my condition deteriorates, the operator is able to pinpoint where I am. So we enhance safety. Second question, the WCF should not be located where it would substantially detract from aesthetics and neighborhood character or impair the use of neighboring properties. We're on a 5-acre property. We're going with a short, non-illuminated monopole. We're surrounded by properties either zoned commercial or development. We will have no harm. Also, we're not lit. Next question, the proposed WCF cannot be located within 1,000 feet of another tower. The closest tower is 4,686 feet away, so more than 1,000 feet. Next question, the proposed user has attempted to co-locate on existing WCFs. That is what T-Mobile does in every case. T-Mobile's desire is to improve their coverage throughout the city of Columbia, Richland County, as well as the rest of South Carolina. If there was an existing tower or, say, a 150-foot building, they would have gone on it. There were none available in the area. Last question says that we will allow others to co-locate on this. This facility is designed not just for T-Mobile, but on the tower itself, there are 4 positions, and on the ground, in the 70-foot, 5-foot by 75-foot area, we have space for 4 other carriers also. The co-location policy of American Tower was certified by Senior Counsel Margaret Robinson and submitted with our application. These are the tower-specific criteria. What I'd like to do next is quickly go through the 17112 criteria for special exceptions before the Board of Zoning Appeal.
Before you do that, I'm going to interrupt you just for a point with respect to staff. Separate from this application, not to be included as a part of the thought process. When we look at these, we always are told about co-location. And we're also always told about other towers in the area or not in the area. Can staff, from here forward, to the extent that you already don't do it, so you may already do it, but I'd be curious to know what the success of co-location is with respect to other towers. Because we're often told that we will allow co-location, and then we're all often told that there isn't a tower where you can co-locate, but we don't often receive data that says this is the percentage of co-location in the area, almost as if to say a company would rather put up their own tower before joining another tower and may therefore find a space far enough away to have their own tower. I'm not saying that in this instance. This is a completely separate thought for staff that came up while listening to your presentation. So if staff can start looking into that, get some data, some information, then that'd be helpful.
I think that potentially some of the information that was provided, and perhaps Mr. Yates can elaborate a little bit more on some of the diagrams that showing the radii. I know that this, generally speaking, another wireless communication facility within no closer than approximately 4,668 feet, which generally would show that there, in that specific area there may not be a tower, and this objective here may show something. And again, we staff will highlight that information, but I think to a certain degree some of it is there already, and Mr. Yates can probably elaborate a little bit more.
That's fine. Thank you. Go ahead.
I could, and Mr.
May I
Cromartie,
ask
if I-
you a question on this point? How many instances, what percentage of the T-Mobile are co-located on either their pole or someone else's pole?
Probably about 95%.
So
Yeah.
so most of the time
Yes,
it
sir.
will indeed be co-located?
Yes, sir. What happened, Professor, is that I'm a little bit of a dinosaur in this business. I started in 1995, 20-some years ago. When I started, I worked for a company called Bell South Mobility, DCS, which is now part of AT&T. And at that point, that was right when the federal government, prior to 95, there were only 2 cell carriers in each market. It was not a good situation for Americans because they had the ability to charge a lot of money and service was not as good as it could be. In the mid-90s, the feds licensed more spectrum and they put more carriers in each market. And one thing happened then, the 2 original carriers at that time, they were used to building their own networks. When the additional licenses were granted and bought, they were not granted, they were actually bid for. The planning community across the country came together and said, hey, we presently have 2 tower networks. We're not going to have 6. So the co-location philosophy was born thanks to people like Brian and Andrew across the country who said, hey, you can share these towers. At that juncture, what happened is the carriers tended to get out of the tower business. Companies were born like American Tower, who came in on assignment for one carrier. T-Mobile, in this instance, there's nothing there they could use. They come in on assignment for T-Mobile, but American Tower designs the tower, not just for T-Mobile, but all their competitors. And American Tower's hope is that each tower they build for T-Mobile or AT&T within a 2 to 3 year period will have their competitors on it as well. So co-location as a concept has worked throughout the country in that we had a paradigm shift from where pre-1995, the 2, what we call the A and B band cellular carrier, they would not share their towers. They built their own networks. The planning community led the charge saying you got to share, and out of that was born the tower industry where the towers are designed not only for who is giving you the assignment, but for all their competitors.
Thank you.
It has worked. It has worked. If I may, these are the 17.112 criteria. The first one, we shall not have a substantial adverse impact on vehicular traffic or vehicular and pedestrian safety, and also there's adequate loading and unloading area. As we discussed with the 911, it's been proven that we help with vehicle and pedestrian safety. This facility by American Tower for T-Mobile takes about 30 to 45 days to build, so we're in and out. We get it up fairly quickly. After that, on an annual basis, T-Mobile would probably visit about 4 to 5 times a year for routine maintenance. Most of it is maintained remotely, so we do not create any traffic congestion, and the 5-acre property gives us adequate parking for those limited visits. Next question, we cannot have a substantial adverse impact on adjoining properties in terms of noise, lights, glare, vibration, fumes, odor, obstruction of air, light, and litter. We produce no noise, no lights, no glare, no vibration, no fumes, no odor, and no obstruction. And on an American Tower site, there will be no litter whatsoever. Next question, will we have a substantial adverse impact on the aesthetic character of the area? Again, we are doing a non-illuminated 180-foot monopole on a 5-acre property that enjoys a very good tree cover and backs up to 2 heavily treed properties. Next question is that we would not have a substantial adverse impact on public safety or create nuisance conditions detrimental to the public interest or conditions likely to result in increased law enforcement response. Again, we've been shown to aid public safety by access to 911, and we do not create any additional law enforcement response. The next question says that the granting of this special exception will not create a concentration or proliferation of this use that could affect the development or redevelopment of this area. In this area, and the visual you have up above, those are all the towers that T-Mobile is co-located on. In this particular area, the closest tower is almost a mile away, so there's no tower to cover this area particularly. This will do it, but most importantly, when this tower is in, American Tower is designed both on the tower and the ground for the licensed competitors of T-Mobile in this market. They can use it, so no need for another tower in the vicinity once this is up, if you grant it. The next question is the exception consistent with the character and intent of the underlying district? We're in the C3 district, the general commercial district, one of your most intensive commercial districts. This C3 is the most appropriate for WCF. When I was on the team working on this ordinance, obviously we were looking to C3 as to carry the brunt of most of the cell towers in Columbia when we designed the ordinance. Question number 7, is the location appropriate for this use? Absolutely. Very rarely in the municipal limits of the city of Columbia will I find a 5-acre property, this kind of tree cover, and this kind of compatible use. The Blue Ribbon Cab Company is manned 24/7. People are going in and out. It's a good neighbor for us, but more importantly, they had the acreage and the tree cover to allow us to tuck into it. Final question, will the proposed special exception adversely affect the public interest? We feel we enhance the public interest by providing what we call 21st century wireless infrastructure. We are no different than power, telephone, water, or sewer. We are something that people are using every day in their lives constantly. The difference from us is if I'm power, telephone, water, or sewer, I have to run every linear foot, whether above ground or below ground, to where someone is. With wireless, a facility like this can cover a nice area, and we provide the infrastructure just from one vantage point. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm here for any and all questions. If there are any particular property questions, Mr. English is here on behalf of Blue Ribbon Taxi Cab Corporation. I apologize sometimes for my long-winded approach, but at being so I am before you for a special exception, I wanted to walk through the criteria.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent presentation. Several questions that I have. Can you go through the imagery? It's a little bit better in color, but I'm curious about the image we have in our packet that shows the photo renderings.
I actually brought a board of that.
Yeah, current view and photo renderings. I'm trying to get an idea of what it will look like with the pole present
Yes.
on the property.
Yeah, we did photo simulations, and they're in the back of your package. Here's my location, and we took 4 locations around it. As you're coming up from here, coming further up on North Main, you'll just see the top of it, again, because of the tree cover. When I'm down over here, you'll just see it. You'll see us above the trees. And that's one thing I have to touch on. We're a line-of-sight technology, particularly pine trees denigrate our signal, so we have to get up above the trees for T-Mobile and the others. And if you come down to position 4, which is right here, it was not visible, and then you would see it behind the Jehovah Church to the rear.
Do you mind if you would present that to staff so that we can see it more closely? One of the things that this board has seen in the past, which is why I wanted to see these pictures, a lot of the concerns from community individuals come with the criteria of aesthetics. And how is this going to look from the roadway, when viewing the church front on or just in transit. And I have seen in previous applications with areas not as wooded as this, which in some ways help, in some ways maybe not, there's some kind of masking. Sometimes there's some tree poles. I don't know if that's the accurate term, but there are poles that kind of blend in
Right.
to the surrounding area. And I'm curious to know why, get an idea of how tall are the trees, how tall is the pole in relation to the trees, and how well that's going to blend into the aesthetics, and why this pole was chosen versus one that may have blended more with the heavily wooded area.
Right.
Or even if that's an option, I don't know, I'm just curious.
It really, what you're talking about is a facility called a monopine.
Yes.
And they work best, Chairman, up in the mountains. Where I've seen them work best is with the monopine, if you have the sweep of green behind it as the elevation goes up, it can blend in. The problem here in the Midlands is that if we do the monopine, because we have to be above the trees and the equipment has to be out there, it stands out worse. We've actually not been able, where I've seen them successfully deployed has been in the mountains where you have a green cascade of elevation coming behind it, so it blends in visually. Here, it would actually stand out worse. What we do from an aesthetic standpoint is we go with first a height that doesn't have lights. I've done close to 2,100 towers. The only time I've ever had a subsequent complaint about aesthetics was the ones over 200 feet that had the illumination on them. We then go with the monopole design versus using the ones that have the guy wires coming everywhere or the three-sided lattice. The monopole is just a pylon like you'd have in front of a Hardee's or a Walmart if they put their sign on and we put the equipment on. And so what we do is we look for a site like this where we have the acreage, the tree cover, and we put it in that manner. The monopine, while it sounds good, it actually stands out more because it draws more attention to it. We tried in Savannah years ago to do these big flag poles, but the flag actually drew more attention. What we found is you just keep the silhouette as clean as you can, get it under illumination level. It will be there, it will be above the trees, but it's what we call your peripheral vision. When I leave home every day, there are power and telephone lines going up and down my street. I don't see them every day. I would see them when they first put them in, but after that, it becomes part of the landscape. Most importantly, after dusk, you do not see anything. The ordinance does provide where we can do the stealth type techniques going into the residential neighborhoods, but here in the C3 in the general commercial, this is the most intensive. This is where we need to have the basic architecture, but again, do it in a manner, the monopole manner, without lights, meeting the setbacks and trying to find a piece of property like this. I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, as we work in Columbia and we have more work to come, I'm not going to find many properties this good. This was the exceptional property, and there are not going to be as many like it.
Two more questions. Generally, when looking at the issue of public interest or aesthetics, we also like to know to what extent the applicant, either property owner or applicant, or in conjunction, reached out to some of the surrounding neighborhood associations or adjacent property owners. Do we have any type of outreach and any feedback from adjacent property owners or neighborhood organizations that we're aware of?
In this case, because of its remote where it was and the distance to the organized neighborhoods, what we did is after the notice period, I kept in constant communication with city staff to see if there was any questions whatsoever. And our policy, if there's any questions, we go one by one to meet. And as I understand it, there were no phone calls after notice to City of Columbia. So during the process, I kept in touch, almost drove Andrew crazy, keeping in touch as often as I could to see if there was any questions that we could answer.
And then you just mentioned stealth techniques if this were more residential. What are those techniques, and could they be applied here? Even though it is Zone C3, what are they, and could they be applied here?
The problem with the stealth techniques is they're all based on the context, and the stealth techniques would be tough to have one that would come up. If I was, say, on a church property, I maybe could do a bell tower. It has to be contextual just to that property. A flagpole is one, but then the flag draws more attention. Stealth is an idea that sounds real good, but in application, we've found a lot of times the stealth technique actually draws more attention to the facility than just a straight monopole. It's an altruism that sounds good in the application and we're writing an ordinance, but when we actually go to apply, it doesn't work as well. Consequently, you'll find where I am in the city of Charleston, we have very few stealth towers because the city has determined just do a monopole and to do them correctly, and it will have the least attention versus trying to create a bell tower where one shouldn't be, trying to create a big flagpole, or trying to create a monopine, which would not work here, either here in Charleston or in Columbia.
So the stealth techniques are flagpole and monopine, is that what you're saying?
Flagpole, monopine, bell tower, a watchtower, that kind of thing. And again, it's contextual. If I was going on a church, maybe a bell tower. On a 5-acre property with a cab company and a banquet hall, the straight monopole works. And also, again, I'm in the C3. I'm in the general commercial district. So at the end of the day, all I have is a pylon sign, a pylon pole, which is throughout the C3 district, but instead of a retail sign on top of the pylon, I have some communication equipment. And unlike the pylon sign, I'm not lit.
Any other questions from the applicant, from staff, from the board?
Mr. Yates, how far back off of US 21 is the tower
188 feet. We're
from the road?
yeah, Mr. Young, we're required to be 50, but we pulled it back a little further. We want to be a little further back off the road to enjoy the tree cover, so we're actually 188. 50 feet is the requirement, so we're over 3 times what we're allowed to do.
Are you using a separate access to the property from the road, or once you're going into the?
No, there's an existing sort of U-shaped access that we'll use that's already in place.
At this time, is there anyone here to speak in favor or in opposition to the application?
With the existing tree cover, since no one else has come up, do you have to cut down a lot of the trees, the existing trees that are there now?
No, sir, we will leave everything in place other than what we scoop out for the 75 by 75, and we'll try to minimize that. And so that's why we pulled it in the way we did, 188 feet off the road, 92 from the south. So we will scoop out just what we need, and that's it. Everything else, other than the 75 by 75 foot area, will be left in place. Yeah, as I said, I will probably be before you in the next year or so. I will not have this good a site. I will not have 5 acres with this kind of tree cover.
If there are no questions from the board, no one here to speak in opposition or in favor of the application, we'll move into board discussion, or we will take motions.
I got a question for staff,
Oh, okay,
if I could. Where was the sign posted on that property? I go up and down that road several times and never noticed the posting.
It was posted on the property. We do have a picture. I can't tell you exactly where it's posted. I believe I did see it when I rode by in the wooded area, at least one space for sure. I personally saw it. There are at least 2 signs would have been posted, but I can vouch that I did see when I rode by at least one by the wooded area.
Are we ready for a motion?
If there's no other, yeah, I think so.
I move to approve the request for the special exception without going all the way through the specific criteria. I think the record clearly shows, and the applicant went through them one by one indicating the evidence supporting the granting of the special exception.
We have a motion from Mr. Hubbard. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Sally. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Next case is 15-055, special exception, 4701 Main Street, tax map number 092160711. It's a special exception to replace a non-conforming sign with a conforming sign. And this one is one you don't see very often, so I'll explain it a little bit. Section 17202A of the zoning ordinance talks about a non-conforming use, structure, or characteristic of use shall not be changed to any other non-conforming use, structure, or characteristic of use unless the Board of Zoning Appeals finds that the new use, structure, or characteristic of use is more in character with the uses permitted in the district, in which case the Zoning Board of Adjustment may permit such change as a special exception. In permitting the change, the Board of Zoning Appeals may require appropriate conditions and safeguards in accord with the purpose of the article. Basically, what we have in this case is a gas station convenience store on North Main Street that has an existing 27-foot tall, internally illuminated, two-sided freestanding cabinet-type sign. Basically, what they want to do is remove the current static sign and replace with a freestanding LED digital-type sign. This sign will be slightly smaller than the existing sign. The current sign is, I believe, 8 foot by 3 by 4, 8 foot 3 inches by 4 feet, basically 33 square feet is what they want to propose now. The existing sign is 58 square feet, and it's a cabinet type sign. There's also an existing price sign for the gas price below the existing sign. So what they're going to do is take the 27-foot tall sign, take it down to 20-foot tall, and put the LED sign and what they would propose. In the MX1 zoning district, no part of any freestanding sign or its support structure should exceed the 4 feet height. Generally, in this case, we're talking about a 20-foot sign versus a 4-foot sign. It is in the MX1 and also the North Main overlay. The North Main overlay specifically talks about the illumination of the sign. Internally illuminated signs are not allowed in the North Main overlay unless more than 50% of the sign is opaque. Talking about a digital sign, so what this would mean potentially as far as enforcement, if you have a digital sign, at no time should more than 50% of that digital sign be illuminated. Potential example would be, generally you ride by, you see the digital LED sign. It's, every pixel is lit up on the sign. In this case, again, enforcement's a little tough, but as a general ballpark rule, at no time should 50%, more than 50% be lighted. So you'd have to have a background of black, basically, and the rest could be illuminated. Again, certain signs are designed that they can do that. Certain signs are not designed. But the big thing with this one is they're asking for going from 27-foot sign to a 20-foot sign. The district allows for 4 feet. Their argument today is that that would be more in character with the uses permitted in the district, and the applicants are here to answer any questions.
Before the applicant comes forward, I just want to make sure that I understand the logic, which is we have a non-conforming use, and since this non-conforming use that is being proposed is so much nicer than the current non-conforming use, we should be in favor of approving the new use because it is less non-conforming than the old use, which would otherwise continue if we don't approve the new use.
You got it.
Okay. I got you. Okay.
Visually, questions. Do we have anything to show what the conforming sign would look like compared to the requested non-conforming new sign?
You could imagine a conforming sign in that location would be 4 foot tall, and we suggested a 4 foot tall illuminated LED sign. Their concern was, people would throw rocks and break the sign. But obviously, with the, pedestrian-oriented, design overlay criteria and the 50% illumination, there's a big difference between 20 feet and 4 feet.
So I feel like we're kind of stuck, which is either I continue my current non-conforming use because it's already been approved and I can keep doing it, or you can approve this new use, which is less non-conforming than the previously approved non-conforming. We're not presented with an option here not to have a non-conforming use. We're just trying to find the lesser of two evils.
Right, it'd still be non-conforming, it'd be a lesser non-conforming use, one could argue. I guess before us today would be, is the use or characteristic of use more in character with the uses permitted in the district, in which case, you could grant a special exception. So, more in character with use in the district would be, moving forward a 4 foot sign. One could potentially make the argument about, other non-conforming signs and the height of those non-conforming signs, but, it varies so much through that area. The idea, I believe, is to obviously get to the 4 foot signs for anything that you would replace or, non-conforming.
That is in that design overlay district, correct?
Correct, it's in the North Main overlay.
I know there's a vacant property next to it. I know Columbia College has vacant property across the street. They have huge development plans. So was the applicant given an opportunity or told that it would be better if they tried to go to the conforming 4 foot sign just to?
Right. I went out there and took about 3 staff members with me, and we all kind of kicked around ideas. Of course, our starting point was, 4 foot sign. And, this section of our ordinance is not used very much. It is in here. Again, the 4 foot sign would be where we would want to go, or in the ballpark of 4 foot sign versus a 27 or 20 foot sign. They were worried about, again, damage their sign being low. They're worried about, I'll say worried, their concern was their visibility of people passing by. Is kind of why they went with the 20 foot. The staff, made no recommendations for, 20 versus 18 versus 15. We're like, get as close, the closer you can get to 4 feet, probably is a better chance that you're going to get, getting this. Is kind of where we left it.
Just curious, walk me through the damage concern outside of a vehicle running off the road and hitting it. Walk me through, because I'm very familiar with that intersection. I don't see some little kids throwing rocks right there at the intersection of Columbia College and Maine. I just don't see that.
Right, and I'll kind of throw this out too, that Andrew just informed me that he doesn't see the applicant here, that the applicant didn't provide an email address, and Andrew attempted to call them yesterday to remind them of the meeting and didn't get a response. So the applicant's not here. So how much you want to go detailed into this, but specifically, they just briefly talked about, their concern was people kicking their sign, throwing rocks at their sign. That's
okay.
about as much as they said about it.
The millions of dollars that's already been spent in that intersection and on both ends of that, it's hard for me to imagine approving a non-conforming sign to replace a non-conforming sign. It just, I don't know.
Well, my concern now is I thought the applicant was present. We're talking about something and we don't have an applicant to
Right.
ask questions. So how do we proceed in the absence of the applicant?
You can proceed. The applicant was made aware of the meeting date, and if they're not here, it's your purview to proceed.
Could we delay it to next month?
You can
Well,
make a
here's the
motion
question
to,
for the board. Do you want to proceed and either vote it up or down, or would you prefer to defer, let the other applicants who are present come forward and notice this applicant again so that we can move it to the next meeting?
We've started it, we've gone through it, unless there's some urgent reason that the applicant is not here.
I want to go at it from the other end a little bit. I assume this has been properly posted. And has the college raised any objection?
I personally, I don't speak for Andrew, I don't think we've received any phone calls on the,
Pardon?
we haven't received any phone calls or email in
Right.
regard to this
What
case.
about neighbors, neighborhood association, anything like that?
I haven't received any calls, no, sir.
So neither the neighbors nor the applicant nor the college seem to care. That's sort of interesting. Thank you.
Well, I will follow the tune of the board as if we want to proceed or if we want to defer. I think that's the first question, and then we'll know what to do next.
I move that we vote.
You wanna move forward? You want to move forward?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we deny this application.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to deny in the absence of the applicant. Could you give me some background on that motion?
I don't believe the applicant has shown that they're let's see. Don't believe the applicant's shown that they meet the criteria for the request, and they haven't investigated what a conforming sign would look like or do at that location, and it's not in the spirit of the zoning ordinance, which, as was pointed out earlier, has spent millions and millions of dollars trying to beautify this corridor of Columbia, and I think that we should be cognizant of that fact. And I don't believe that the proposed sign is any better than the former sign. I'm assuming that it's still going to be an El Cheapo, and I'm just wondering about the rendering that shows feed and seed or whatever, as opposed to what it would really show on there, trying to make it look better. But I see no reason that the applicant has proven that they have
So we have
got this variance.
So we have a motion for Mr. Sally, a second by Mr. Young. I'd like to go into some discussion about that. Can you go into some discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to nail down the objections more specifically. Based on the record we have before us, the 17-202A basically says we may permit, not that we must permit. So the idea is it just says we can talk about it if it's not as bad as what's there. 17-112, the standard criteria that we normally apply. The written application is sparse at best and doesn't really address the things. And the applicant is not here to help us expand on it. And so I think the applicant has not presented an adequate case, either by being here or by writing it down in the written materials. And therefore, I just wanted to elaborate why I'm supporting the motion to deny it.
Is it possible, Mr. Sally, that Mr. Hubbard's discussion points could be considered an amendment to your motion?
I would accept Mr. Hubbard's amendment to my motion.
And Mr. Young, do you second Mr. Sally's amended motion?
Yes.
All right, so we have an amended motion from Mr. Sally, seconded by Mr. Young. Any more discussion? All right, all in favor of denying the application, please state aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. That motion, or that request has been denied.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last case today is 15-057, special exception at 525 Galway Lane, tax map 164010118, a special exception to expand an elementary school. In this case, this is Meadowfield Elementary School. The applicant has placed additional 4 temporary classrooms on the property of the elementary school for, again, classroom use. The elementary school, or a school in general, is permitted in RS1 zoning district with a special exception. We would consider this an expansion of the current use as a elementary school. That being said, we would come before you with a special exception. Should the Board of Zoning Appeals approve this request, the applicant, we ask, would need to comply with the buffer yard requirements on the rear of the property, which in this case would be 40 feet. These potentially may be reduced to 25 feet with an 8-foot privacy fence, or 50% with the provision of a 6-foot masonry wall. In this case specifically, what staff would be looking at is the buffer between the classroom use and the single-family residential uses to the rear of the property. This case came before you and was initiated in response to a citizen concern regarding the location of these 4 new portable classrooms to the site. The applicant, Mr. Perkins, is here today and can answer any questions.
Mr. Perkins, good morning.
Good morning. As mentioned, this is a special request to expand needed space that we have. We have found ourselves in a position where enrollment is increasing within the school district, which is a good thing for us. And in order to handle some of the increasing in capacity needs, we're having to put temporary classrooms in place. We are looking at trying to address this from a more permanent standpoint, but for right now, we need to put those temporary classrooms in place. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Before we go through the application, one of the key issues that was raised by staff was the issue of the buffer, and that was 40 feet or use of a privacy fence or masonry wall. Is the 40 feet present?
No, sir.
Okay.
We placed the classroom. I noted a minimum of distance of 35 feet. I think staff went out and measured it. It was somewhere in the ballpark of about 38 feet.
Okay.
So we're 2 feet over what we need to be.
And
In making note of that, it would require that 8-foot fence, and we would be willing to do that according to the requirements of staff.
okay, so if that were a condition, then you guys are willing to put
Yes, sir.
the fence up,
Yes, sir.
and therefore have the buffer and all that? Okay.
I have a question from the staff the only reason I'm at all sympathetic for what's going on here, given the nature of the construction and so forth, is that they're called temporary.
Yes, sir.
And we do have the right to put conditions on the grant of a special exception. And I want to make sure, is there some way that we can condition so that these temporary things don't stay there forever the way things normally would if we granted an exception?
You could, yes, sir.
So how long are they going to be there, do you think?
I would say anywhere from 5 to 10 years, but it would require a substantial amount of funding to build. Again, we are looking at trying to address that from a more permanent standpoint. So I just...
Is the plan to expand this school or to add another one? Or is it not that far along?
We're not that far along. We are looking at trying to hire some professionals to look at what our options may be. So I really don't have an answer for you just yet. We have a number of things that we looked at. A lot of people are not real pleased with some of the options that are out there. So we're having to struggle through that.
You said 5 to 10 years. Could
Yes.
you live with 8?
Sure, we can set that as a goal and make the
Well,
board.
if we make it a condition, it's more than a goal. It's not,
Well, yes, sir. We certainly would comply to that, and that would be shared with the board, and we would move in the direction that we need to address it
Great.
from that standpoint.
now, I'm not sure, I mean, I'm just me talking. I mean, we haven't yet
Well,
put such a condition.
I
I'm just
certainly
trying to
understand
get
that.
an idea of where you.
What we've tried to do in the past is to work with all of the county and city staffers to try and do what we can for the schools
Right.
and for the students.
Well, if
So
we're trying to-
certainly, we wouldn't object to what you're saying.
Okay.
Let
Thank
me piggyback on Mr. Hubbard's question and kind of coming at it from a different perspective. If there were, let's say, a 10-year limit,
Yes.
would that then assist in reaching a decision for expansion sooner? For
Sir.
example, if you didn't have 20 years, and you
Certainly.
had a 10-year with,
Yes.
because it could be both a condition, and it also could serve as incentive for the board to say, you know what, we only have 2 years left. We have to expand Meadowfield because we can't use portals anymore. So it could be something that's helpful.
Yes.
But I'm curious to know if
Well,
it would be seen that way.
Let me say this. The board is extremely concerned about the overcrowding
Right.
issues that we have. We have it in a number of places.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have taken action to address that because it is in the best interest of the students that we have. So there is an active goal or actions that are being taken to try to address this. In fact, there are funds set aside to address school needs, about $6 million or so. But it's growing as to where we have it. The unfortunate thing is that we do have seats in other locations. So we're having to deal with how do we balance all of that, still keep the public happy, if you will, and then do the right things for the students at hand. So yes, it will help us focus on that, but please know that the board is working towards that.
The Richmond School District 1 does a great job, and so you say they're working on it. I know they're working on it, so I got you on that. Let's walk through some of the criteria for the special exceptions. Will, and all of these questions are being asked with the understanding that the 8-foot privacy fence will be added.
Yes.
Will the proposed request have an impact on vehicular and pedestrian safety?
We don't see any increase in that because it still will continue to be a school.
And will the proposed request have any adverse impact upon environmental factors or the aesthetics?
No, sir. It stays the same purpose as it was, and so we don't see any change from what it already has.
And will there be any adverse impact upon public safety or any nuisance conditions, or will there be an undue concentration for this area?
No, sir. We still stay within the boundaries of the site, and the classrooms will be enclosed on that site.
Having been well educated in temporary portables in my youth, I know that they're consistent with the character and compatible because they were when I was there some years ago.
Yes, sir.
And do you find that the application is consistent with the public interest?
Yes.
Are there any questions of staff or the applicant from the board? With the 8-foot privacy fence, does that address the concerns of the public and staff?
It would address the concerns of the staff related to the ordinance, 8-foot privacy fence. If, of course, I don't know if anybody has signed up to speak in opposition or for, but the 8-foot privacy fence would leave us with a buffer of 30 feet, so that would be adequate. If the board is inclined to grant this request, staff would just respectfully ask for some type of time limit on when the fence would go up.
Is there anyone here to speak in favor or in opposition to this application? If not, we can move into board discussion, which I think is probably going to be leaning towards a time period, A, if one's applicable, and B, what that number should be.
Having raised the time period, my concern is that when the applicant expressed, their concerns in terms of the public, the focus was on the public, generally the public served by the school district. The problem is the portables are impacting directly on a specific neighborhood and specific neighbors. And the criteria, again, are focused, like the setback and the fence, seem to contemplate a more permanent kind of thing. Long-term use of portables has an impact on the neighborhood around it, which is why whether we want to call it an incentive or whatever, there has to be something. I understand the difficulty. People move where they move. They have as many children as they're going to have, and you can juggle lines, but eventually you've got other ways to handle it. But it seemed to me 8 years is plenty of time to decide what you're going to do at this school or another school and do it. It's awful easy when you're public, where I work, we also face problems of where we're going to find money to pay for things. We've waited 20 years for a new building and it's still not built. Because you're juggling priorities with limited public funds to try to do as much as you can. But again, there are impacts on the people who live nearby that are not shared by the district generally. 8 years to me, back to going on, I think there needs to be a limit, and I think 8 is a fair limit. It's a pretty long time. And worst comes to worst, we have another horrible economic downturn, whatever. They can always come back again 8 years from now and reopen it. Do you follow me? It's not a forever kind of thing. But it seems to me to be a fair way of trying to say, you have your problems, you're doing a wonderful thing for the district, but at some point, let's get it done and get on with it.
Sure.
So I'm willing to talk about it. Anybody else want the idea of a time limit or how long?
I agree with the time limit.
You agree with the limit and the 8, or just the
No,
limit?
I like
idea?
the 8.
You like the 8, okay.
Mhm.
Any other comments or thoughts about the condition of fence in 8 years? Okay. Any questions from the applicant?
No, sir.
Would you be receptive to the fence and the 8 years as conditions?
Sure.
Okay.
Keeping in mind, you can tell your board, but please don't emphasize it, they can come back in 8 years.
Okay.
But I would suspect that the board sitting here 8 years from now, which will not include me, I'm sure,
Yes.
would probably want to know what is going on
Sure.
and why it hasn't happened in 8 years.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
That being said, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the request for a special exception. The testimony and other evidence in the file indicates that the criteria for special exception have been satisfied. I also move that this be subject to the requirement that this special exception only exists for the temporary buildings, only exists for 8 years, at which time, if there's a problem, that can be addressed. And the reasons for the condition, as I've stated, I think, for the record already.
And fencing is also a condition. Did you add that?
The fencing, well, I think they've already, yes, the fencing as well.
Okay.
The setback, is that correct?
Yeah. All right. We have a motion from Mr. Hubbard. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second from Mr. Young. All in favor, please state aye. Aye. So approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, can we get a time frame on installation of that fence, just for staff purposes?
90 days? Is that, I don't know what they're, well, let me do this. Mr. Perkins, would you come back for a brief moment? We've already voted, staff asked me what the time frame should be for the installation of the fence, and I didn't want to say something without having had your input.
Okay.
Do you have an idea of what the process or the time frame is going to be to install the fence?
We'll be working on that right away. We'll probably have it done within the next 30 days.
Okay, so let's say 60 just to be safe. Does that work? If that works for you?
That will be fine.
Okay, so let's say around 60 days.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you,
Thank
Mr. Perkins.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the cases for today.
All right, the August 11th, 2015 meeting is adjourned.